Right Wing News. This video brought to you by Noble Gold.
Hello, fellow Americans. Welcome to Right Wing News. I am your host, the voice of reason. Wish I came to you with better circumstances today. Perhaps you have already seen my video titled, Please Save Right Wing News Before It Is Too Late. The left is now pulling out all the stops. The one last hope where anything center-right was being communicated and not being stifled was YouTube. That has since come to an end. Just last week, in the last few days, basically all advertisers have pulled out, and the rationale is because they don't want their advertisements going in front of hate speech and the like, knowing full well that most of it is just a difference of opinion. So as a result, most YouTube channels have suffered up to a 90% hit in our revenue, which is our income. Folks like myself, I gave up a career practicing law to do something I felt was infinitely more important, which is delivering news that the mainstream media just simply won't. And with news like America looking like it's going to crash when stocks, home prices, even used cars crashes, all by at least 50% coming, with articles like Trump as president, prepping is becoming more important than ever, not because of anything he's done, but because of the environment that we're coming into. Are we in fact getting into a war with Syria or North Carolina? These are all paramount issues that people need to get the truth on. So it's not just my channel. Like I said, whether you're doing video games, whether you're doing cooking, baking, or the news, you've received a 90% pay cut to your revenue indefinitely until they figure out a way to fix their algorithms, and you can be darn sure who's going to pay the steepest price. It's going to be channels like my own, and arguably, if you're watching mine, ones like others that you watch. So, please, I encourage you to check out the video titled, Please Save Right Wing News Before It's Too Late. Again, all of your channels will probably be asking for this. Normally, I personally hate to beg for donations. Until we figure out a way to weather this storm, your donations are going to be crucial to keeping our channels alive, quite frankly. So there will be a link. It will be the very first link in the notes section. Anybody who donates over $10 will be eligible for one of 3 $200 Amazon gift cards. In the meantime, because of the other news that you're not getting as it relates to the economy, I've got a dear friend, Charles Thorngren, who happens to run Noble Gold, and he's going to talk to you about something as simple as, can you afford to lose 40% of your retirement account if and when, not if, but when the market goes south? So sit back, grab a nice coffee to relax with, and listen to what Charles has to say. His number, as well as a link to his site, will be included directly beneath my plea for you to donate to keep Right Wing News alive. Voice of Reason out. Hello, fellow Americans. Welcome to Right Wing News. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. And today with us, I've got a very special guest, Charles Noble Gold. Charles, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks, Mike.
Charles is in the precious metals industry, and one of the reasons I wanted to invite him on today is, as many of you know, if you've been following The Last Great Stand for any length of time, I'm constantly preaching prepare, prepare, prepare. Constantly putting out articles on our nation's economy and why people need to be preparing and what they need to be worried about. So Charles, I think the first thing that potentially we should discuss is kind of the state of the nation right now. We just saw the Obamacare vote did not go through, the repeal and replace, that I would think at the very least probably could have eased the minds of some businesses. I don't know that it makes tax reform totally impossible, but probably adds some challenges to that. We've got a major budgetary deadline coming up on April 28th. So there's a lot of things kind of swirling around in the market right now. I believe we just, correct me if I'm wrong, Tuesday I think marked the longest losing streak in 6 years. Is that correct? With the markets, I believe. So there's an awful lot happening out there, and just kind of wanted to get your take on things from the seat that you're sitting in, as far as what you see coming in the short run, and with that, I'm just going to zip it.
Interesting question, and subject I love to talk about. I often think of we've all seen the cartoons where you see the sweater and there's that one little string, and you start pulling and the whole thing unravels. And not to say that we're done, we're losing our sweater, but things don't look attractive. And it's a simple process that we do have all of these issues coming together at one time. The Obamacare repeal. Really, that was an introduction to us that some of the promises that were made were going to be blocked. And this is not about the business aspect of it. This is not, people don't necessarily agree with it. This is politics. And unfortunately, when you mix politics and budgetary issues, you don't always get the result that you should be getting. Common sense will leave the window. Whenever politics is involved, 1 + 1 does no longer equal 2. Sometimes it equals 2.5, 3. So that's what we have. We have a president who wants to come in, understands the business aspect, understands what it takes to run a company, and he's going to apply that same logic to our budget as a nation. The problem is there's politicians involved. They have now seen that what they held sacred is no longer sacred. The American people will remove them if they don't do their job. So now it's time for them to defend their jobs. We have a couple generations of people now who don't know anything other than being a politician. They actually trained that. That was their career field. They went to college to learn to be a politician. The days of people serving for the betterment of the nation are gone. No one does their 4 years, their 8 years, and goes back and runs their business, becomes productive in the society anymore. This is now a career field they plan to retire from. So that, for them, they're protecting their job, much like you and I protect our own jobs. The only issue is it's hurting us. You'll see budgets that don't get passed because of political reasons, no matter how much sense it may make. You and I may look at it, and some of the wording of the budget can be misleading, but a lot of it is common sense. Don't spend more than you make. We live our lives like that. That's what we do. And when you don't, you're called bankrupt.
So, that brings up a very interesting point, because I just done a video and a post dealing with the upcoming budget decision that needs to be made by April 28th with the funding resolution. And one of the things that Trump said, you just said you don't spend more than you make, or something to that effect, to paraphrase what you said. And Trump was talking about priming the pumps. And essentially he was talking about, how we're going to need to go way deeper, and he's going to have to outspend Obama. I mean, it's a translation to what he said, is we're going to need to, the infrastructure. How many times have we heard him talk about that? So I call them the Trumpettes, the people or people suffering from Trumphoria, but I prefer to call them the Trumpettes, because they believe that this guy can do no wrong, when in fact so much of it is out of his hands. And when Barack Obama said that they were going to spend their way out of debt, well, that was insane. That made no sense. But yet, when Trump says it, now all of a sudden it makes sense. And I find that very concerning, because, being somebody that constantly preaches about preparing for a collapse, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to need it. We saw in the prepping community, going back, roughly right around November, it was like a nuclear bomb went off, and everybody stopped just with this belief that things were going to be fine. And I, for one, absolutely believe that we have got some very dark days ahead as a country. That's not an indictment on President Trump, his ability, his knowledge, or anything else that I would be chastised for daring to criticize the man. But the problems that our country faces are so systemic, not just our country, our planet, the global monetary system, that perhaps we can use this as an opportunity to educate people on why they should believe that tough times are coming. And if we can convince them, or at least give them enough of an interest to begin looking into it maybe more than they have, then what can they do about it to begin to insulate themselves from what I believe is ultimately going to believe a crash of biblical proportions.
And that's a proper use of the word biblical. It is something that it's going to take its toll around the world. Looking at rough numbers, if we see the same form of correction that we saw in 2008, you're going to see about $55 trillion of wealth disappear. I won't say in the blink of an eye, but pretty quickly. And this is the reality, because we've had a scenario where we did fund an economy. We tried to spend our way out of a recession. Now, that's not necessarily a bad economic tool if used properly, but that's the key word, if used properly. And we haven't done that. We have now is this entire quantitative easing circus that went on. We've had many rounds of it. None of that money has been brought back out of the market. And that's what's so dangerous. We have $17 trillion of funds that need to be removed before you can start another round of loose money. But we don't have that. We don't have that opportunity. And what makes it even worse is you have the Chairman Yellen talking about 3 interest rate raises this year. That does a very interesting thing. That puts us in a position to where now we can't pull that money out because it's going to cost us more to remove it. So how do you go and fund? And granted, some of those things need to be done. The infrastructure is bad. We all know that. We all drive around. We all can't get where we need to go. We understand that. But it has to be done in a time that makes financial sense. So rushing into it only compounds the problem. And it's one of those scenarios where, and I hate to use this analogy, but it's pretty powerful and it's pretty accurate. The person right before they go bankrupt, what do? They max out their credit cards because they're writing it off anyway. It's not their problem. So they might as well get a new TV. And it feels a lot like that. And that's a very scary thing for people like you and I who don't go out and run up massive debt, who do save our money, because when this happens, your dollar is worth less because the world is looking at us saying, you're that broke uncle that wants to borrow another $20. And at some point you quit lending it. So how do you fund massive programs when you have massive debt? And that's the issue. You can't. You just can't. Not without causing tremendous tremors throughout the financial system worldwide. You will see, and it's very interesting that the budget comes up on the 28th of April, because right before then, from the 24th to the 26th of April, you have the IMF meeting. And this is where you could see a scenario where the dollar loses its hegemony. You have Russia, you have China specifically, pushing for a basket of currencies to be the world currency. So you have 2 scenarios that could really create a death rattle for the dollar. If we lose our status as the world reserve and our budget doesn't go the way we want, you will see money flee from the dollar. It has no choice. When you look at it from our standpoint, it sounds horrible because it's our dollar. But if you were outside of the dollar, let's say you held the yen, you're living in China, it wouldn't make sense for you, and it would be a prudent thing to not invest in the dollar because of the dangers of it. And people have to remember that the world is trying to protect itself. So what we need to do is protect ourselves. Since the government can't do it, you need to protect you and your family because troubling times are ahead.
So you mentioned the meeting with the IMF, and one of the things I don't want to talk about this for too long because we may lose people a little bit, but one of my fears with regard to that is, will Eastern nations be willing to go into, in other words, will they even accept, is it feasible for us to think that there's going to be a new world reserve currency? In other words, if the IMF chooses to come up with a basket of currencies and declare that as the world reserve currency, that doesn't mean that China is going to accept it. It doesn't mean that Russia is going to accept it. It doesn't mean that Iran is going to accept it. And there's nothing that says that they have to. especially in this new world where the dollar is slowly being, or U.S. Treasuries are no longer, in so many countries' piggy banks anymore. So
True.
even if they do, I think you and I could probably agree that the dollar is going to lose that status. And anybody who's under the age of 70 has no idea what the planet Earth looks like without the dollar as the reserve. So I guess it's kind of a two-part question, and then we can talk about some of the things that people can do to protect themselves. Is do you see that as a very real issue? The fact that some of these Eastern nations may not partake in what we declare, we being Western society, the ones that have caused much of this mess, and furthermore, kind of expound on what it exactly means from your perspective if we were to lose the world reserve currency, because most people that I get emails from, particularly as it relates to the economy, is when we were 15 trillion in debt, Mike, you guys were all screaming the sky is falling, and now we're 20 trillion in debt, and gas is cheaper than it was then. So you're crazy, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's really hard to argue with somebody like that, or to try to convey the direness of our situation, because they're something I'm famous for saying is he who controls the information controls. And our media, our government, our academic system is so good at controlling the lack of information that gets to people that it's very hard to convince them, that the sky is falling. So maybe kind of your thoughts on what that means for people, and then kind of maybe toss it into the idea of what happens if some of these countries don't accept whatever the Western banks decide will be the new currency.
Great questions there. Yeah, and it really is. I mean, I know I myself, I've been in the metals market. We're going on almost 20 years now. So I understand. I've been called a little out of touch. Just because I'm early to the dance doesn't mean I missed it. I'm just early. And the reality is debt is debt. You cannot continue to run debt. People know that. Just because they may not want to believe it doesn't mean that it's not going to affect them. And we see this when we look at the way the world looks at us. Gas is cheaper now, yes. Here's the reality behind gas being cheaper. The Middle East decided that the United States is not going to be able to get into the oil and gas industry. So we're going to reduce the price of oil to the point where you can't compete. That one's pretty simple. The dollar and why an extra $5 trillion isn't an issue. Well, here's the reality behind that. It is an issue. And you can see that because you have countries like Iran who started accepting the euro for oil instead of the dollar. That's not because they didn't like us, because they have plenty of dollars themselves. That was because they see the writings on the wall. That was because they knew taking those dollars was not going to help them. They had to find a way to protect themselves. And this is why you see China beginning to start to expand its influence. It's one of those scenarios, we have to remember why the United States became so powerful. We made everything. We don't make anything anymore. We make debt. That's all we make. Okay? We've transferred our entire economy from a manufacturing economy to an information economy. Doesn't work. People have to have jobs. So you now put yourself in a scenario where China's like, I don't need you. You need me. I build the items that you say you have to have. So I don't need your currency. You need my currency because you need to buy the items that you want. So this baskets of currencies, it may have been talked about for a while, but when you look at the numbers, it's slowly creeping that way. The United States is losing its power in the IMF, and it's been happening slowly. Reasons for that are pretty obvious when you think about it from a big picture. If it were to change overnight, there would be chaos. And this is why you've seen the slow evolution of people getting rid of their treasuries. Foreign countries now don't rush to the auction anymore. Some of those currencies don't go. They're slowly selling them off. And this is why you see countries like Russia and China who have spent so much of their extra money in buying natural resources in South Africa because they're ready for this switch. There's going to be a change in the economy where we go back to the basics. And if you go back far enough, you'll see that gold and silver have always been there. It was considered currency. We'll get there again because in times of fiat currencies, and remember, this fiat experiment we're on is still relatively new. Every empire has had the sun go down on it. It doesn't mean we quit living. It just means that no one wants our dollar anymore. Look at France. They were once a world leader. Look at England. They were once a world leader. Transition is normal, and it happens. When the people in Britain went through that amazing, not the pound, your dollar loss of value when their currency got revalued, it happened overnight for them, and it was terrifying. And they didn't believe it would happen. Excuse me. But it did. And it happens to every nation that is the leader. It's just what happens. It's a normal course of events. What we say is understand that it's there. Protect yourself. There are ways to do it. You can invest in precious metals. It is the counterbalance to a fiat currency. As the dollar gets weaker, gold and silver go higher. It's the natural course of events. It's always been that way.
So is there any scenarios that you can think of, and I realize this is somewhat of a loaded question to a person who deals in the precious metals markets, but is there any situation that you can see where there isn't an exponential growth at some point in the price of precious metals, at least relative to the dollar, which is really the only thing that Americans would care about anyway?
Right. We will see a major event soon. You're going to see precious metals move very aggressively. And it's not the first time. You know, we go back to the last president who was not truly a politician, and it's Ronald Reagan, when you look. And if you look at what happened there, when he said, I'm going to let this economy figure itself out, when we had 18% interest rates, the price of precious metals went from the $65 mark on gold to $850. Silver, same thing. So when you have these form of events, and those of us who remember Ronald Reagan, I know we chant his name now, but he wasn't always so wonderful then. And he had to fight a political system as well. So it's kind of apropos that we're talking about it now and everything's falling in place at the same time. We said we had enough then, and we elected somebody different. We said the same thing now. So to expect the metals not to move with this amount of debt, it just doesn't make sense. It's fallacy. Anyone who's telling you that the precious metals are not going to move up has an interest in it. And I understand that I have an interest in it too. But when you read the reports that I've written, you see the information we post, we take a very neutral approach. When you talk about protecting assets, you know, there's multiple asset classes, and you should be diversified. Precious metals, stocks, bonds, real estate. Those all have historically been considered a balanced portfolio. We've gotten away from that. And unfortunately, people think how many different stocks I have determines how diversified I am, and it's just not the case.
So what would your recommendation be to somebody that is financially astute enough to realize that we do have a big problem coming? And you really don't need to be a student of economics to know that to be able to presume that there's major troubles on the horizon by the sheer fact that we are the single most broke country on earth. I mean, there's if you're the single brokest person in any room, is that ever a good situation? We are the single most broke, in debt country on the planet Earth. That is not going to end well for us, even if it's just not going to end well for us. So to somebody that at least recognizes that and knows that they would like to insulate themselves in some capacity, how is it that something that you said, I'm sorry, just real quick. I think one of the reasons people got away from that balanced portfolio, I didn't mention we were talking offline that in a different life, before becoming an attorney, I was actually a registered investment advisor. I had my Series 7, my 63, 65, all that fun stuff. And, I won't say who I worked for, but it was kind of like if you go to a Chevy dealer, odds are the guy's going to try to sell you a Chevy, right? It was...
They never try to sell you a tourist there.
Exactly. And that was, I remember that the finance. I worked for one of the biggest firms on Wall Street. There was, when people would ask us about gold and silver, it was, no, you don't need that. And again, it all came down to what could we sell. And I was so young back then, I didn't know any different anyway. But so I think that has a lot to do with the way that we've turned into this service industry. Everybody has their boutique financial advisor that has their little book of goods and whatnot. But to somebody that realizes that I do need to have myself more diversified than just being in 3 different mutual funds, how do we go about beginning that process? And I think people would be incredibly interested to hear at least some of what you offer. Certainly has some tax benefit to it as well. And with all the problems we have, increasing tax burdens is probably not something most people are looking for. So,
No one is. It doesn't matter how good or bad the economy is. No one wants to increase their taxes. That is one truth that everyone agrees on. The process is pretty simple. Give us a call. Contact us. See what your options are. Not everyone fits into the same little basket or the same little shell. So what we really want to do is get information to you, see what your situation is, and see if it makes sense. You'll be surprised. We don't always say that, yes, you should buy metals. Certain people shouldn't. There are scenarios where it's not right for you. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's probably not for you. If you don't have a retirement account, you're not getting the benefits of putting money away every year in a retirement vehicle. Maybe it's not for you, but it's worth a call. I have a team here. It's a fantastic team. We've been doing this many years. We help many people. Give us a call, see what options are available, and see if it's right for you. That's where you start, because until you get the knowledge, you're never going to know.
So it all boils down to what I continue to tell my audience, not just in posts that deal with economics, that deal with virtually everything that I discuss, and that's he who controls the information controls. And right now we live in a society where the information that is most crucial for literally the people's ability to provide for their families, to keep their families safe, is the same information that they're not getting. It's lies by omission. So if he who controls the information controls, then it's time people get more information. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that by giving you a call, that they can begin to get educated on something that they may not have had an education on, and you can help them determine whether or not it will be appropriate for them to begin to maybe make some changes compared to what they've been doing. Because if you always did what you always done, you're going to always get what you always got. And that's what our country's been doing. So if people continue to do the same, well, that you're going to always get what you always got. So I will make sure that in the notes section of this video to everybody, there will be a link to get to Charles so that we can see what situations may be appropriate for you. Other than that, Charles, I want to thank you for your time today. I think it's been a very insightful thing for people to hear about, that things are not as rosy as the media would have us believe. That there's 4.7% unemployment. That it's just comical to hear the talking heads talk about it. So it's nice to get a refreshing point of view, somebody who recognizes the fact that times are going to be tough and isn't afraid to give people the news that they need to hear.
The great thing is we're Americans. We're tough people. As long as we get the information to prepare ourselves, we come through this. We're very resilient. It just, if you're feeling uneasy, then you need to call. I mean, and that's a lot of us. No one's talking. When I walk around, no one's telling me how wonderful everything feels. It's not what you hear nowadays. No matter what you hear from this source or that source, no one on the street is saying that. So give us a call and find out. I think it's the best way to get that information and get that knowledge and make sure that you can sleep well at night because you've got a plan. You got to have a plan.
At the end of the day, it's what it all boils down to is can you sleep at night? And again, the knowledge is going to give you the ability to do that. So, folks, there will be a link to get to Charles in the notes section. Please give him a call. Make sure that you're doing everything that you can do to keep your family as safe as you possibly can. And with that, I'd like to thank you, Charles, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it as well.